Hey friends and music makers, a very warm welcome back to the channel. In today's episode of Cheat Codes for House and Techno, we're going to be turning up the heat on the topic of working with samples. I'll be guiding you through the process of using some samples in your music production. I'll be breaking down some of the benefits of working with samples, the art of working with samples inside of a sampler, techniques for processing your samples with effects, and we'll explore why samples are actually a valuable tool for producers and how they can add depth and character to your music. So if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments and let's learn and grow together. My mission is to help you level up your production skills and unlock your full creative potential. Ready to slice, dice and reimagine sound? Let's dive in. As usual, we'll have a quick test. Hopefully microphone's already loud and clear. Just going to turn up this drum track now a little bit. Let's just make sure all of that is working fine. If anyone's already in the stream with me, feel free to let me know that the microphone and the music level is good. That's always helpful. It's all looking systems go at this end. All right. So, samples. What should we know about them? Using them in house and techno, and of course all the different subgenres that exist between house and techno. I always think back when I think to sort of samples, I guess that's kind of a little bit of the inspiration of today to take a look at them, is listening to some artists, particularly someone like Bicep, for example, which I'm a big fan of, probably no secret on this channel, spoken about them before, great inspiration, and I like many aspects of what they do musically, performance-wise, etc. Anyway, Bicep, the story of how that ties into samples is they began their sort of music production journey using samples, and that was sort of hinged on a couple of factors. Budgetary constraints, and most of us, like perhaps we've got Ableton and a computer and we don't have, the budget to go and buy a bunch of analog hardware synths and drum machines and things like that. So first of all, there's sometimes economic constraints, and then also, is it arguably sometimes an easy way to kind of get started with production as you're already working with some kind of often good material, rather than needing to come up with your very own material from scratch by being able to understand how to program synthesizers and drum machines and things like that. So as I said, love listening to Bicep. They were inspired by 90s house and techno, and that's kind of how they began their journey producing before they went to where they are now, where they've got a beautiful analog studio and digital, but they have lots and lots of hardware synths and synthesizers based on the past. Stuart Ross, everything is working. Great, thank you, Stuart, and nice to meet you and welcome aboard here in today's stream. So Bicep, as I said, they were inspired by samples. So a small they were, as I said, they do things different now. I'm sure they still use samples, particularly in parts of their process. But anyway, let's dive in. What I want to say straight off the bat, I've done some videos on this channel before about sort of actually taking loops and sounds out of sample packs and kind of working with them creatively. That's not kind of what I'm doing here today. It's going to be a little bit more advanced than that, as I'm going to be sort of mainly working with samples, but inside of a sampler as an instrument. So stick around for that. As I said, I won't be doing a lot of just taking an audio track, a loop, and just plonking it on an audio track and pushing play. That's not what I'm trying to sort of help you guys and girls with here today. So let's think about coming back to Bicep and 90s house, and let's think that we're in Ableton and we're in the computer and we're in the DAW. But maybe we want a bit of analog vibe and we want some sort of like hardware sound and texture and samples in our production. So what I've kind of done here is I've gone through a lot of the sample packs I've collected over the years, and I've kind of made a little folder here called Cheat Codes, and inside there I've got some samples by Gold Baby, who by the way do excellent sample packs for drum sounds of the 909 and 808, lots of classic drum machines. So I've got a 909 sample pack from them, and then I've got another sample pack here which is just all sounds from the Juno 106 synthesizer that's been recorded out, lots of the presets on the synth. So I've got, like, you know, synth sounds and pad sounds and things like that here in this folder. And then I've got another one called Korg Monopoly. So both those two synths are classic analog hardware synthesizers. So what I'm thinking here is, right, this is a cheat code studio where we're inside Ableton in the DAW, but actually I'm going to be thinking like I've got a Juno 106 over here, and I've got a Korg Monopoly over here, and I've got a Roland 909 drum machine, right? So you can kind of recreate that analog hardware studio inside of your DAW, and that's going to bring a different flavor to the music, right? Because all of these sounds have been recorded from those machines, and they have that factor about them that they're original sounds from those machines. So they have a bit of the analog crunch and vibe to them. So a great way to sort of think about, we're in a hardware studio that, even though we're not, and bringing a certain texture to our tracks because of that. Are there any rules? So if anyone's in the chat here before we get going, so let's say we're going to grab a sound out of this Juno 106 pack. And if we look down through here, we kind of see that each of the sounds are named by obviously the preset, but nothing much else, right? It's just Juno 106, it's a bass sound, it's a drum sound, it's a pad. So if I click on one of these, let's go into the pads for a second. And that clip there, actually, that really reminds me of a Fortet song. I'm not sure which one it is, but I'm sure he used that preset in a track of his, as I can clearly hear the track in my mind without knowing the name of it, right? So let's say we're going to use that sound inside of a sampler. Is there any rules? Is there anything we need to think about when we're doing that? Perhaps we want to put it in a sampler and play it on our keyboard. If you're here in the stream with me today and you have an idea of what that might be, let me know. All right, so I'm just going to go to this MIDI track here that's empty, and I'm going to just drag that sound down, and Ableton's going to very nicely put it inside a simpler for me. Job done. That's how we're going to be working today mainly. As I said, is we're going to be using samples and audio inside of instruments, not just plonked in on an audio track. So let's give ourselves a C3 MIDI note. Let's make it legato, so we've got just kind of one bar of C3, and if we hit play, we should have some action. We've also still got my drum track over here, which is kind of nice, but I think we'll build up some drums in the moment. We could use it as a bit of inspo for a second. So I don't see anybody commenting about the rules, but the thing is that if we kind of put a C3 note here in this MIDI clip, and we're using this 106 sample over here, we don't really have any indication in the file of what is the pitch or frequency of this sample, right? And so coming back to the 90s and early house music and hip hop and lots of genres that use lots of samples, I think a lot of people sometimes think it's kind of magic that it all came together and there was no need to kind of understand anything about music theory. And the truth is, you don't. If you've got a very good ear, then we can start putting lots of these sounds together from this pack here without any concern at all for understanding what is the pitch or frequency of that particular sound, right? You can lean on sampling if you think you've got a good ear and you can understand this fits with this and that fits with that. Go ahead by all means and just go sampling and using samples, and hopefully you'll have a good cohesive sounding track and project. But if we want to dig in a little bit and understand what we're working with, particularly perhaps we want to play this sample up and down the keyboards. Stuart Ross, get it assigned to the right key. Excellent. Yeah, so that could be a really good move, right? Thank you, Stuart. You're spot on. That's the point I'm trying to make. You can do sampling by ear. And as I said, lots of people have done it and been highly successful. But in this case, we don't know, is this a chord? Sounds pretty rich, sounds pretty thick. We don't know a lot about it, and we don't really know a lot about the tuning of it. So what we can do is you could set up a little rack. I know that I dropped something earlier on this group track over here. These are just kind of reminders and things so I stay on track or make sure I try and cover some of the things I wanted to show you today. So I just put together a little Ableton rack. It's got a tuner in it and an EQ8. So let's drag that onto this track over here. And let's say that we'll leave I think a great starting place is either to have a C3 MIDI note like this in your MIDI clip, or you're going to play one on your keyboard, one way or the other. So I can also go to my MIDI keyboard here and hold down C3. What that means is I kind of know that I'm in the middle of the piano, and that's a good starting point. So what I want to see now is, with this little rack on the end here, do I actually see any tuning show up here in the tuner? That would be great if we did, which I don't really, right? And that is often the case. Sometimes you can move the playhead around and it might pick up something if you do that, and sometimes it just won't find anything at all, like is the case here in the tuner, that is. So sometimes you can play around a bit with the playhead and do a few different tactics and see, you might end up, or you can even sometimes make like a smaller loop, just dragging in the start and end points. Maybe that helps it kind of find its way. If you go really small, for sure it probably will. So if we loop, yeah, we can go right into something like turn it into an oscillator. And if I go backwards a little bit, there we go. I have pretty much that small tiny loop of the sample. That's bang on a C, right? So that could work if I wanted to do that. But let's say it didn't work, the tuner didn't find it, and we want to sort of play a bit more through this sample. Let's try with the EQ8 over here. Let's maybe blow it up a little bit, and we could turn off all of the bits here to do with EQing. We really just want the spectrum analyzer. And we want to kind of see if we can figure out the sort of pitch of it here. And what we could do is turn on one little bell, maybe number 3, and we could kind of bring it down. And boost a bit of one of these sort of harmonics or frequency points here. And I'd generally say the lowest one here is a good starting point, and that's probably the note. I would imagine this might be a chord though, right? So it might be made up of multiple notes. So what we could do in this case is, this seems to be an A. And so what we could do in this case is come over to the controls here, and A is two semitones away from the C, or 3 if we want to land it on the C. So if we move our transposition of the simpler 3 semitones higher, and we now sort of move our frequency up, we should be sitting now on a C. And we're on C4, right? And if we want C3, we can actually go the other way and bring down our note till we again put it in the point. So I'm nearly there, one more semitone down. So I've now got a C3 matching, right? So all of that might seem a little bit unnecessary, but what that's now meant is, and we're going to turn that EQ off, that was just to help ourselves find our way there. And as Stuart mentioned, if we get it assigned to the right key, we can then actually now go up and down our keyboard a bit. And each note we're playing is effectively matching, right? So if the tuner was working, we'd actually see that we'd have a C when I'm playing a C, and we'd have an A when I'm playing an A, and a B when I'm playing a B. Again, that just makes life a lot easier if you want to replay samples on your keyboard, because otherwise you start to get in very messy territory. You're playing a C, but it's actually an A, the sample's an A, or it's an F sharp or something like that. And again, we're leaning very heavily on our ear to help us with that. Right, so now we've got, when we push play, a C, it's tuned to a C down in here, and we've got a C. So as I said, if we were to move this anywhere else, it's in key. Which means we could now pick a scale and a key and use this sample, right? So we could be up here in Ableton and we could turn on our global key and scale awareness, and we could choose a new key and say, okay, let's put it into that key. Now, if we wanted as well, when we realized that the sample was A, well, we could do everything in A today if we wanted and not actually re-pitch the note. That would be another option. We could say, okay, it's an A, and let's make all the music in A. But we've got it in C, so we can go anywhere now. And let's say maybe actually we'll work in A minor. So let's do that. And C is in A minor, so if we turn on our scale, it's actually the third interval of A minor. So we could go on the root if we like, A2. Nice. Right, so that might seem, as I said, like a bit of messing around, but it's not a rule. Like I said, I put a note here, any rules. It's not a rule, but it's a good idea, and it goes hand in hand with samplers. If you want to play them up and down the keyboard, good idea to understand, get it in the key, and then you can do that. All right, so we've got this kind of chord or sample here, and we could move around. And sometimes when we do this, if it's a chord progression, we might have a different tuning somewhere else. This seems to be pretty constant, which is great, but you might find that if it was a chord progression, you might move the playhead somewhere else, and that might cause you to have to retune your instrument, particularly if you want to play from that point. You can also go zooming right into here, and we can find like a zero crossing point, which is where this little gray line in the background and the sine wave or waveform lines up perfectly with that. That means we don't get any pops and clicks from that start point. Right, so now the fun stuff starts. Let me just show you how we can kind of develop this sound with the simpler a bit. So let's say we pop it out of that. We could also bring up the volume a bit. So I'm just going to right click in here. And let's bring normalize up. And we can hear actually it's got lots of nice kind of noise in this sample. I like that. It's kind of the reason we're doing this a bit here. Okay, so one thing I might like to try here a little bit, which can be fun, is let's try changing the warping mode over here. So let's turn warping on. That's also going to mean when I pitch something up and down, it's going to stay also in key. The pitch isn't going to change the tempo, should I say, so we're not going to speed up and slow down. So if we change our BPM up here, everything's going to stay in the same pitch, which is also another important thing. So if you left that off, if I was moving my tempo up and down up over here, my BPM of the track, it won't stay in key. We can get it to come out of that eventually, right? So good idea to warp the sample as well. So we're just going to go backwards to 128. In this sample, it wasn't too extreme, but some if that was a vocal, you'd end up with a chipmunk if we sped it up, and you'd end up with something like a very strange low voice if you pitched it down. All right, I'm going to work in 128 today. Just zoom my face in so I can see that. There we go. Lovely. All right, so I'm going to turn warping on, and I'm actually going to stay in beats because this is what I want to try here. I want to try and get some sort of variation into this sample, and I'm going to do it by using the beats and the preserve transients. So over here on preserve, I'm going to come down and I'm going to choose eighth notes. and then I'm going to move this envelope amount down a bit, and that's going to make this sample kind of, before I do it, we could also come here and we could chop up the notes. So let's do that. What's going on? I think my keyboard's, we'll come back in a moment, but I think it's asleep, so I'll just do it a different way. Yeah, it's definitely out of action for some reason. Use it for a little bit, it goes asleep. There we go, excellent. So now I'm going to go back to what I wanted to do in the first place, put that into legato, and now I'm just going to chop it. So that's 16th notes chopped, so we get that kind of rhythm. And I could also turn my grid into eighths and then slice it. But I'm going to show you a trick here down in the sampler. We're going to leave our C note exactly like it is, or A note should I say, and we're going to use the beat preserve, and that means we can adjust it a bit as well. And we get this nice kind of just little bit of movement in the background there. Hang on one second, I'm just going to look at the chat there. D. Karmich, if I said that right, at Heath Home, I have a chord in a clip, and when I change the global key scale, nothing happens. Yes, so it won't, you might have to describe that a little bit more, a bit differently to how you have, but you've got a chord in a clip, so I'm imagining you've got something like this, let's say, for example, and when you change the global key scale, nothing happens. So what would happen is if I've got a chord in a clip like this and I change from A minor to, let's say, D minor, you'll just see that literally, let's pick a scale here where there are some quite different notes. It will simply just kind of show the different notes that are in that particular scale, and my chord doesn't necessarily change whatsoever, but the notes that are available to me in that particular scale do. So maybe if you just explain to me what you want to actually do, because there is a trick. So here we are in A minor with my chord, and my chord is matching notes in the scale. Yeah, okay, that's what I thought you might have been thinking. So there's a really cool trick to do that, and that is, let's turn this off. And let's say we've got our triad here, right? And what we want to do is change scale up here, and we want the triad to sort of follow that scale. So now I've got my triad, it's all on notes of the scale, right? We can see that there. And now I'm going to change to, let's say, as I said, something a bit more unusual, let's say F sharp minor, and my chords are not in the scale anymore, right? They're not on notes in the scale. You can now highlight your chord and you go to this page here, so on this tab, and you ask it to fit to the scale, and it bumps it to the notes in the scale, right? So I think that's what you're looking for. I love that feature. It means that you can literally have chords anywhere, change your scale, and then you can literally ask anything to be fit to this scale up the top here. So I hope that makes sense, because that's how you can do it. Of course, you could manually move them, but that's how you can automatically move them. If I do another change, let's say I go to G minor and I highlight these chords, fit to scale, you'll see it just moved it again. All right, so I hope that helps. Love that feature, using it all the time. And you can see, okay, my chord's a bit further spread apart than it was, but I can always come up and move the notes around, but it's in the scale. It's just constantly going to keep moving depending on whatever scale I'm in, right? If it's the same matching notes, then it's not going to go anywhere, but each time you highlight this and you can ask it to fit to the new scale, right? So we could also go something major, and again, we're sort of landing on scales now where the notes are the same. But anyway, I hope that helps. As I said, I'm a big fan of this feature up here, fit to scale, because that will do that for you. Make any chord you like, choose any scale up here, and you can get it bumped into that scale. Okay, so I'm going to bump that out, hit play again where we were, And we were just putting a little bit of movement into this through the beat preservation. And if we change the 16th, it would be more dramatic. We need to move this arrow as well, my mistake. So we're not actually hearing anything till I change the direction. So that's important, you know, I'm human. Sometimes when I'm doing these things, I make mistakes. That's how it goes, right? And so it wasn't actually working until I make sure that I've done everything right so far. I've turned warping on, I'm in beats, I've got 8th preserved instead of transients showing here. But I'm not going to get that 8th note movement until I make this preservation mode be the straight arrow all the way through. Now, when I bring down the envelope amount, we'll start to hear that movement. So it sounds like I chopped the notes, but I didn't. And as you can hear, I can kind of make it really dramatic or just a very subtle bit, but it's already taking this sample and kind of making it move a bit. And if we go 16th, we get much more drama. So as I said, you could do that another way, right? You could literally, as I said, come up here, chop up your MIDI note and kind of work with that, but then you'd be playing around with the length of the MIDI note as well to get the same sort of result. So this envelope amount is actually quite nice because it's helping us kind of play around with that a little bit. So let's just make it quite subtle. Nice. Then let's go to the LFO page. In the middle here of the Simpler, as I said, we're looking at how we can work with the Simpler, do quite a lot. And let's change the LFO shape to a square wave, like so. And let's apply the square to the pitch. So we're going to modulate the pitch a little bit in the Simpler here, and let's note sync it. So we'll come down the bottom here, we'll choose note sync. And let's have maybe 6th, and let's go up now on the pitch. And let's make it say 50. I like 6ths, so it's kind of a triplet feel of what's happening here. So that LFO now is giving us some movement of the pitch, and we've got that movement back on the sample of this. So it's all making that sample a bit more vibey than it was a moment ago. I'm moving the start point around. We can also play with that a little bit. I'm just going to go back to where I had it. Okay, let's bring the filter in. Bit of resonance, sweep the filter down. Let's go into the second page of the Simpler again, and let's look at the filter envelope. Let's bring up a bit of envelope so that it's going to open and close that filter a little bit around the cutoff. Nice. So if we switch off this pitch LFO, pretty static, right? So we're getting life out of this sample, and this is kind of a way, as I said, you can get a sample, and we're not just plunking an audio track, we're kind of getting it to kind of talk to us and get it to be a bit more interesting. Could also have velocity in the mix here if we had if we did slice up the notes and have different velocity. We could have velocity opening and closing the filter a bit. That would be even more dramatic if we had sort of randomized velocity on this note, but we don't want it too crazy. Let's now play around with the amp envelope. Could have a softer attack. Okay, so let's maybe play around with this. Let's move this track. Let's duplicate it. And by the way, Deneliation, you're very welcome in the chats. Okay, so let's try flipping some other samples, see if there's something else we like, given that we might need to retune it, but we've got this sort of simpler setup. So let's maybe try some other pad sounds in here in case there's another one we like from this Juno synth. So we can hit stop on the other one, and we're going to trigger play here. And I'm just going to drag in some of the other ones. And if you drag it in directly down the bottom here, we're keeping the LFO and everything else. We're just changing the sample. So I'll just open the filter a little bit. Some nice ones in here, and you can see it. Let's keep going down a bit. Quite like this one. And we could also use some of the other parts of the LFO here. We could have a bit of panning movement with the same LFO in the simpler. Okay, and let's say if we wanted to, we could now apply the same thing. You know, because I copied this over, we know that in the previous sample, I kind of figured out that it was A, and we retuned the synth so that when we play a C, we were getting a C back in the sample. Well, this new sample, we don't really know is an A giving us an A, so we could check that out. Probably need to use the EQ again. Let's see if the tuner works first. And let's say again that we basically put this MIDI note back up to the C for a moment. Our friend the tuner doesn't help us out there, so let's try the EQ8 again, and let's bring it down to the lower note here. So that's sort of showing a B. So if that's the case, we're going to need to tune back up. So let's now move our frequency up. So we've got a G sharp 2, so we're a bit of a way away from a C yet. C3 that is. Nearly. Fun side effect of this as well is you get very good at understanding intervals. So now we're getting a C for a C, right? All of that just tells us that if we want to play this synth up and down the keyboard, we're now matching a C with a C. I'm now going to bring it back down to the A. Maybe I'll go a little bit lower. Let's maybe use the D there, quite like that. So the idea with this track was to make it into a bit of a noise kind of little pad kind of drone thing, which we've got going on. Let's maybe try now some effects on it and see what we can come up with. I think I've got a little rack that I built over here that I can kind of probably reuse, and I can explain you what's going on in it. Maybe not. All right, that's fine. I'm sure I have it somewhere here. All right, let's see. Let's just tone it down a little bit first. So what we've essentially got here, and it's got John Hopkins reverb in there because this is a John Hopkins kind of workflow that he uses here, which is two reverbs, very, very wet, very, very kind of lots and lots of decay. So if we open up the first little rack here, and if we were building this from scratch, we'd be literally grabbing ourselves a delay and a reverb from Ableton. So it's just Ableton devices here. So if we built this from scratch, we would grab ourselves a delay and we'd turn the feedback off completely and the dry wet to 100%. That's all that we need to do on the delay. Nice and easy. That's the first thing in the chain. And then we've got a reverb that comes after it here, just an Ableton reverb. And the key thing with that one mainly is, again, it's going to be very wet, 100% wet, lots of reflection, a little bit of diffusion in the high end, no freeze flatten, the decay is max, the size is max, and no high cut, low cut down here, and also the pre-delay max. So it's a bit of an interesting kind of setup that he uses here, but that's going to give us a very wet, washed out kind of effect. And what he actually does is then layer another reverb behind that. And in his case, he uses his favorite plugin in the next rack. I've got here a FabFilter Pro R. It's the reverb from them, but you could use really anything you like, including an Ableton one. So let's say we finish off the rack a bit, and let's make it all Ableton. So we'll turn that off. We'll group these two effects like so. Open up the chains, and we'll make a new chain at the bottom here. That's going to be the dry chain, so we can call that dry. And then we've got the second chain with those two devices on it. And then what we can do, so we can delete this one over here, is we could go and get something like the hybrid reverb from Ableton. Let's say that's a favorite. It is of mine. Let's maybe turn it into a shimmer, blend all the way over, lots of dry wet again. And then we're going to group that one. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to make another chain. It's going to be the dry. And now we've got that, and we've got the hybrid chain below, and that goes into the same sort of rack. And so you're actually passing it through from one to the other. And of course, this reverb here could be anything you want. Like I said, favorite plugin. The main rack at the start is sort of the consistent feature. This rack at the end could be more customized, but what it's doing, it's giving us this big kind of washed out kind of droney pad. It's kind of loud, so what we would do is we can bring down the dry a lot and the wet, so we can just bring the wet. Let's switch it on off. Just balance in how much of that we want. So let's just dry with none of that, passing through the whole rack. And if we add this in, then we've got the wet chain with the delay and reverb. And if we added the second chain, well, of course, as you can hear, things get pretty wild. And what we could do with that afterwards, which could be quite nice actually, I'm going to use for fast a kickstart here. But we could again make all of that reverb groove as well if we wish, and we could sidechain it to something such as the drum grooves, or that's a bit too much. Really need to pull the kick out of that drum groove, but it's in a rack, so I won't be doing that for now. So let's just use the Nicky Romero kickstart like this. Now we've got this kind of grooving drone. But mainly, it was all about the simpler, right? And if we sort of turn off some things, you can hear that we've changed it quite a lot. Let's start with our rack off over here. It's amazing kind of how static so the LFO's a big difference, right? Which is giving this nice pitch movement. The preserved transients also is interesting. So we take that away, we just end up with a very boring static sample. So all of this is just giving it a little bit more interest. The rack afterwards, if that's putting all the reverb and stuff, you don't have to use, but it's just adding more flavor and it's processing it a bit. But the LFO and filters a big difference. And we've got two choices here. We've got our other friend over here. Now I'm hearing it, I'm back on this one, but again, this one doesn't have the rack set up here. So let's copy that over as well. Bring it down a little bit. So that's an optional thing. Nice. All right, so let's move on. Let's say that we've got our sort of sampling workflow now. All of those pads, and we're using analog samples in Ableton, and we're kind of bringing this kind of like analog workflow here. So we're sort of thinking like we're in a studio with some synths and hardware, but we're not, but we're getting that nice texture and feeling. And if we go back to some of these pad loops or pad samples over here, they could turn into really nice chords or a riff of some kind. So let's come back to the pads, and again, maybe we'll flip. Something like this one here. So let's say we go into a new MIDI track and we drop this one down and we move our start point in a little bit. Right, so we get this lovely kind of vintage, sudden, kind of cool vibe here, just from a pad, just a sample. Doesn't really sound like much, but we're going to turn that into our lead, and that's kind of where you could understand that all of these guys were, you know, particularly people like Bicep and stuff, when they started producing, you can get something like that and turn that, you know, rich chord pad sample into the main lead. Let's say if you're making techno, that was going to be part of the track idea. So similarly, we should really follow our workflow along a bit here. We could drop this little rack that I made earlier onto this track now and just get a feel for what's happening. So if I open up an empty MIDI clip and I'm playing C on my keyboard, what's going on? Do we have a C in our tuner? And how are we doing for the start point here as well? Probably not too bad. If we want to be fussy, again, we can just get it on a 0 crossing point, which means it plays nicely from the transient and attack start of the note. But again, we're probably going to have to use our EQ8 to sort of see what's going on. Now let's just turn that off for a sec. So I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm now tuned to a C3, taking this little note in here, pitching it up a semitone. And when I play a C, which is here, as you can see, I'm matching down in the bottom corner there, a C3. So we now know if we're going to play that up and down the keyboard, we're going to get a C when we play a C, and we understand that's what's going on, which is helpful. Could make the note nice and plucky. But I kind of liked it before with the music I have so far, maybe just playing a slow, kind of like I was doing. So let's try that. Let's try capture. We'll take one of these where the second note's a bit louder. Let's do a little bit of quantization. Too much. So I'm going to slice this note, I think. Let's try it, change the grid a little bit. Go the other way. A bit different to that. keep chopping and changing between the two chord examples I gave, or the two pad examples, because I think they're actually quite close in terms of what they kind of bring to the table. So it's a line ball sort of thing as to which one I prefer versus the other. But yeah, interesting to have that choice. So we've kind of got this deep techno vibe happening here at the moment. So let's maybe get a bass line into here out of the same pack again. So let's carry on working with samples. So let's say that we're going to just do a bit of housekeeping here. This is our sort of pad drone that we got all that nice movement into with the Simpler. This one's our kind of just stab at the moment. That's also now, it's got less sort of movement in it for a second. We'll work on that in a moment. So I'm just going to move that other pad across so I don't keep chopping and changing. Let's stick with these two, and let's get a new MIDI track in. And let's maybe get a bass line happening. By the way, if you're here in the stream with me, there's a few of you earlier on. Do feel free to drop any questions you've got in the chat. Say hello, let us know where you're tuned in and listening from. This is a Cheat Codes House and Techno episode, and we are looking at using, in this case, samples and trying to get some interesting workflows going on with samples and bring a bit of analog feel to a digital project. Right, let's crack on. So let's work a little bit on this sound. Let's get back into the filter section as well. Let's try a little bit of tremolo on this stab for a bit more movement. So again, I'm using this square LFO in the Simpler to give me, let's open up the filter a bit, this really nice tremolo. So we're modulating the volume of our sample in the Simpler. And I've note synced it to 3/16. So we're getting that nice movement. Let's get an auto panner on this. And let's shift it around, and if we don't pan this one, we might pan the drone pad. That moving around our head a bit. How does that sound with the... So these are all the little sort of secrets, the things that sort of make your sounds kind of a bit more professional. It's more three-dimensional, it's got more movement to it, it's got more depth to it. And when you start switching off these LFOs and things like that, we get a big difference. And I've kind of made them strong. They could be very subtle. So all of these things could be dialed right down. So it's just a little bit. But in this case, I think it suits to kind of emphasize that a bit. Let's have the not so much envelope, filter envelope that is. Let's give it a little bit of dirt from the filter as well. Back to our panning. Maybe we'll slow that right down. Let's give it a little bit of reverb as well, a bit of hybrid. Right, let's get our 909 drum samples in the mix that we have for today, because we're kind of thinking we're in a beautiful hardware studio with a 909 drum machine on the side and a Juno 106, one of the most popular synths ever. For Juno 106 is great because you can actually get lots of different great sounds out of it. It does pads well, it does basses well, it does leads well. So it's a great investment in a studio if you can grab yourself a good one of those in good condition, and one that also has been converted to MIDI. That can be really useful. So in the studio as a hardware synth to own. Let's have a drum rack, an empty one. We could use, by the way, if you wish, you can use obviously Ableton's 909 core kit or one of its variations. I'm going to use an empty drum rack here, and I'm going to jump into, let's hit stop there. I'm going to jump into here where we're working today in this little folder here, and I'm going to grab some of the Gold Baby drum sounds. Let's have a 909 kick. There are many here, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. Just one kick will be fine. I think at the very bottom. Nice standard 909 kick drum there. Let's also have from there a bit of everything. Sort of a closed hi-hat there. Some interesting ones in between. It's a nice open one. What are these vinyl ones? Sounds quite nice. We might as well throw that in the mix. Gold Baby, highly recommend them if you're looking for really great quality samples from those drum machines. They've, you know, resampled them, they've run them through tape and different processing, so you can see where you see original tape saturation. So they've kind of ripped them through analog gear as well, so they've got some color to them again, some vibe. That's the reason for using them here. It's kind of adding a little bit of extra detail that we don't have, or I don't have. So it should probably give us some extra snares, and then let's get some toms in there. Okay, that's one. Have we got any low, high, or that's a bit unusual. Okay, so it sounds like a high, bit of a mid. How low do we go? Right down there. Okay, cool. All right, so we've got a bit of a 909 kit there built out of the Gold Baby samples. So let's throw ourselves in here, a bit of a drum rack, and get a bit of a groove happening there. We've got some drums already, but let's get a nice 4 on the floor kick happening. Give ourselves just a tiny little bit of variation on the velocity of the kick. We'll just bring this one down a little bit, just for a little bit of extra analog feel. Let's copy that across. So as I work on each sound, let's make sure that we've got a little bit of vibe. Let's open up the sub mixer as well, bring that clap down a bit. Let's tighten it up maybe. Just repitching it, changing the shape, shaping the sound a little bit. Let's also go with the kick, we might add a bit of crunch. Nice big beefy 909. If we turn off that filter, that Oscar filter, we've obviously put a lot in. Good. Now let's get back into the clip itself and let's give these claps a little bit of variation on the velocity. Just a little bit. We could also try bringing them just ahead of the grid a little bit. For a nice sort of pushing feel. Let's get some hi-hats. Let's get some velocity into these guys as well. So I might undo that and I might actually do this manually on this. So let's say we pick the first 4 here. I'll do it one at a time. Just going to go try something a little bit here. Copy that over. Ghost notes in here as well for a bit more groove. Let's get some snares in here as well, just for a little bit of a conversation with the clap. Get a ramp on those guys. Nice. Love all these tools in 12, by the way. This is Ableton 12. A lot of these velocity things are just super intuitive. If you're programming beats like this, you can get in there, make little ramps, make little adjustments. You can keep things that you've always been doing, but you've got all these lovely features that allow you just to fine tune. It's quite fast. May have some rim shot. shape those a little bit. Try a bit of erosion on this clap. Let's have a listen to the clap for a second. Just trying to give it a little bit of dirt. It's pretty clean. Give it a little bit of dirt. Stuart Ross, have you got a favorite swing setting? And do certain swing settings sounds better at different BPM? That is an excellent question. Often what I'll do is kind of do a lot of, particularly if I was playing, I wouldn't quantize too much of my drum programming. That sort of gives you a bit of natural swing, pushing the claps around a bit like I did before, putting them forward. Sometimes I'll move things off the grid if I'm going to program it like I'm doing in today's stream, rather than playing on my push or on my keyboard. But I do have a few swing settings. So if we were to open up the groove pool, there's a few that I quite like that I will use from time to time. Will it change around at a bit of different BPMs? I think that's an excellent question. I think you should always play around a bit with the tempo of your track, because sometimes things sound a lot different and sometimes better when you slow down or speed it up from wherever you imagined you might start working. The concept of swing though won't change. Like, it's still swinging the same notes, which are if you add let's say a 16th note swing to your grooves, it's still moving the even notes a little bit away from the odd notes. That stays the same, but definitely with the tempo and different swing amounts, you can, absolutely get some really interesting feel and groove. So the short answer, I guess, is I don't automatically use swing, but sometimes I do. It really just depends what I'm looking for. You have to just be a little careful that if you do start working with a swing, you probably need to apply it everywhere else as well, right? Or sometimes not, but it's something else in the mix to think about. If I bring a swing in, so let's say that we bring our groove pool in, and let's say I kind of know straight off the top of my head, for me, that any of the logic swings with the lowest number possible, so I'm talking about 16th swings, I think that's what I would use most of the time. The 50 is going to be very close to straight. It's just a little bit of off straight, just a little bit of swing. If we get up to the 70s, we start to get galloping horses, right? So, sometimes what I'll do is I'll give myself a selection of just a bit off straight. So something like 57 could be nice. And then I'll have a 63 in the middle there. And probably I'm not working too often in the 70s unless I'm doing sort of micro house or minimal house or something with a lot of shuffle and a lot of swing, or house that has a lot of groove in it. So think about it in the percentages. That's the numbers, how far off the grid it's going. The smaller numbers very close to straight, in the middle versus galloping horses with lots of swing. So 16th swing, we could put the logic in the pot here. We could choose some of the MPC ones. So I like the logic ones. I like the MPC 3000 ones. Again, we've got 61 there, or a 57. That sort of seems to be around the number I would use if I was definitely swinging stuff. Notator can be good. You don't get the same numbering system, but that's another classic machine, as is the SP1200, which again has 58, 54. So, you can throw those in the groove pool and then mess around with them. So great question. Great to have the thinking and the questions here. So I hope that helps a little bit. They will definitely sound different with a bit of tempo change as well. So yeah, let's have a listen here, for example, with this drum groove, what we've got so far. And let's give it a little bit of swing from our groove pool. So already with 57, it's noticeably more kind of a lazy movement. And when you're flicking through these like I'm doing, we're just basically previewing them. I haven't applied or committed, but they're being previewed. And if we go back to the pool itself, we can kind of see that at the moment I've got the Logic 57 on, bass note 16ths, we know about that, timing's 100%, and it's also changing the velocity a bit at 20%, so you can also mess around with this and in real time. So that's a massive amount of change in velocity, quantization. If you want it tight, very, very tight or not. If you want a bit of randomization of all of these parameters, so you can really kind of mess around in real time as well, which I do like. Again, 12 offers a lot of great features like this, so you can play around with the grooves and mess around in real time. You can also kind of need to make sure, just trying to remember what this little one is. It's also kind of new. Yeah, so use the toggle to switch automatically applied grooves on or off. When enabled, a groove will automatically load it into a newly created MIDI clip. So if this is on, every time I create a new clip, actually that groove is automatically loaded with the clip, which is quite handy for keeping, like I said, the thing in mind that you've got a groove going and you want to sort of check it across everything else. So at the moment, the stab here doesn't have any groove, right? But if I put that groove on there, then I can check how does the stab sound with the groove that I've now got on my drums. So I hope I'm making sense. But yeah, as I said, great question there. And I do think the 57 sounds interesting. It changes it quite a lot. So if we go back in here, and we go back to none, it's much more straighter. So maybe a bit of 57. And we just turn it down a bit. So 0, nothing. Maybe 80%. It's kind of nice, or a little higher. My ears, I'm kind of in between there. So let's go with 88. So now, this drum clip over here kind of needs also for me to kind of follow that lead now. Now I would try the stab. And any new MIDI clip that I put in now is going to follow that one. So we are swinging. Right, so we've got a basic drum groove now with our 909 to complement the other drums we've got. let's crack on with maybe a bass from our Juno synth, but using a sample. So let's maybe have a MIDI clip in, and let's grab, we can kind of bring the groove pool down, and if you want to hide it, you can hide it over there for a moment. Okay, let's get our samples back. Bass, what have we got? Could also use a low tom, could be interesting. I didn't add any in the 909 kit, but we could. But let's see what we've got in the Juno. And let's just drag one of these down so we've got a simpler rolling. Let's arm it. Okay, that last little bit, it's kind of not so easy to play with zoom and everything going on. We get quite a bit of latency, but let's see if this last little one here can be tidied up and made, as there was a groove in there that I was enjoying, but yeah, it's this. So this is the thing I was speaking about a little bit about swing before, that often sort of when I play stuff in my own workflow, I don't over quantize things, and so this naturally kind of has its own groove already, and I'll tighten it up where it doesn't sound nice, but I kind of also like to leave it with vibe as much as possible, and that kind of can often be the answer in itself, that the swing kind of comes from playing things in with MIDI controllers, recording it, and then using those takes, and don't over quantize things, leave the soul in there. So let's just hear what this sounds like. So maybe this note. So for example, not really quantizing it much more than what I've just done, just manually here. All those little imperfections, kind of helping it a lot. So let's have a check. Breaking my own rules here, but I'm quite used to like listening, and I do trust my ears are pretty good when I'm hearing samples that go together. But in this case, I just played on the keyboard. I have no idea if I'm getting an E. I've got an E in my clip here, which was the note I was playing my keyboard, but I don't actually know if this bass is playing an E, right? So if we copy the MIDI down, and let's do a bit of an exercise here. Let's crop the clip at those MIDI notes. Let's duplicate them. So we've got a couple of bars worth, and let's move this one up to C3. And then let's see what we're getting. And we'll just turn off a few other bits and bobs. So let's get our rack, if it's still around the place, or have I binned it? No, I think I've got one here. So let's try that on the bass. Be nice if we got, the wrong rack. Okay. Got a couple of racks in play. There it is there. Great. Okay, let's open up the tuner. Be nice if the tuner gave me a hit straight up, and it does. There you go. Sometimes manifestation, friends, it's powerful. And it's pretty much bang on a C. Look at that. So we can just detune it a little bit. So that means that E is giving me an E, right? So there wasn't much to do. If you want to be fussy, we've detuned it. It can be even nice to keep a bit of that wobble from the detune. Maybe we'll just have a little bit here and we'll keep a bit of that. So if I go back to my E, I'm actually getting an E when I'm playing an E, which is great. So what I'm going to do here is, this was just messing around with the tuning, so we're actually good. That was by fortune, but obviously we've checked it now and we know that we're getting an E with an E, which is amazing stuff. We've got the original take here. In case we want to use anything else, there might have been another good capture somewhere over there to the left. But I'm happy with this little section here. Crop it. Okay. And in theory, because that automatically is on, we should actually have that in this new MIDI clip, which is interesting, but I don't see it. But anyway, for now, I'm just going to use it as I played it. Let's make it a bit longer. So what am I doing? Duplicate. Here we go again. It sounds a bit different to what I had, I feel like. Let me check in on this. What's going on? Did I not have an even loop or something like that? So we've got kind of one bar and then it's flicking around. Okay, so it's just, feels to be like I don't have what I think I should have. Let's try that. Okay. Going to tidy it up a little bit more now I'm listening. All right, let's check out the sample. So again, I'm just going to try flipping some different bass samples in here. I know we know this one is tuned. But again, I'm going to mess around with that just in case I kind of hear a better bass sample. But I've shown you a few times now how to make sure, and Stuart came in very early on with the answer to the question, get assigned the right key before using the MIDI. So we've been doing that a few times here. Otherwise, you need a good set of ears and you need to trust that you understand that everything's fitting together harmonically. So I just dropped that first one on. Let's try some other ones here. They all seem to be more or less giving us a E. So there must be a little click or something at the end. Let's fix that. What is it in the actual waveform somewhere. Yeah, that's a bit annoying. Must have a click in the waveform somewhere, which I can hear. It's kind of annoying because it's not something I can sort of seem to fade out or fade in or fade out. So we'll try another sample because I kind of like that sample, but it has a click in it, which is kind of bugging me a bit. So let's try and see what else we have. Let's put our envelope back as well. Make sure I've got nothing funny happening here as well. No stray random notes getting a little click happening. Aha, so the click isn't in that. So, funny stuff. So we can go back. Which one was it? Just going backwards here. It's still got the click. Yeah, so the click is in the drone track. So we'll need to fix that in a moment. So have it a click, it isn't in here. All right, so we've got this bass sample. Let's dial it in with the kick a bit. So the envelopes are giving each other a nice hug. Have a bit of fiddle envelope. Now, this is particularly important with samples, like a little bit like we've been doing, tuning them and then being able to play them up and down the keyboard, shaping them so they all fit together. With synths and MIDI, you should be shaping them really right from the beginning. Here we're sort of doing the same, so I'm trying to fit the kick and the bass together so they're sitting nice and tight together. The notes are fitting around each other, so I kind of already understand that my kick is hitting, you know, here and here, they're overlapping, and here, so there's a bit of space, but it's nice to get them to fit around. And also the bass at the moment is on E2 and the kick is for sure down in this C0 to C1 octave, so they're kind of a little bit separated, but yeah, good to shape the two sounds. So short bass, not getting over the kick, long decay, long release, I'm weakening my kick. Still sounds okay, but it doesn't sound anywhere near as good as it did a moment ago when everything's nice and tightened up. Filter envelopes adding a nice little bit of character here. If we turn this off, it's also adding drive to the sample, so I've been using that a lot as well. That's pulling a bit of more character out of the sample every time I do that. We can try voices of 1. It is a... It's not a chord, it is a bass, but I think that sounds pretty good. Let's try with some other things. Maybe bring up the velocity a bit. So this is going to be a 1. I'm not sure if you're still there, Stuart, but I'm going to leave the groove off on this one because again, I didn't over quantize it. I kind of like it, and I'm just testing. Do I prefer it with the matching groove that the other clips have, or leaving it on its own to do its own thing? And I'm kind of going with the leaving it on its own to do its own thing. Let's just bring our levels down a bit. With this synth, I'm going to maybe try pitching it up a bit. Yeah, maybe a, let's see. Okay, I think we're missing a 909 open. Okay, just make sure we're on the right track. Shaping our sound again. Do we want a tight open hi-hat or a splashy one? Or somewhere between? Maybe a bit of erosion to process it a little bit. Let's try a tiny bit of delay on this bass. Yeah, it could be interesting with a very mellow delay. Just give it a bit more groove. Okay, so let's do something else now. Let's kind of get something else that we haven't done over here that we could try out from my things to do with simplers and samples. Let's maybe see if we can get ourselves a bit of a percussion loop or something to go with this. This is going to take a long time to die away because there's a lot of reverb on that sound, so we'll just switch it off for a second. So over on this MIDI track here, sticking with the theme of simplers and working with samples inside of them as an instrument, let's see if we can just find a perc loop of some sort. Yeah, this could be an interesting one. So let's maybe have that on this MIDI track down in the instrument down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to just set up a clip for the moment to be legato and play through the sample. We might need more than one bar to get through. So how many bars is the sample? We can see down the bottom. Well, I think it's less than a bar, or around longer, a lot longer. Right, so let's make a 4-bar loop. Let's turn on warp. So that's great, that's now working in there. The warping was important because that kind of stopped what was happening with it playing down in pitch. It's now staying at the original pitch of the loop with a note in C3. So that kind of was important to turn on the warping. Also, it gives me access again to play around with the preserved transients, and we could put the transients into action and use the envelope to sort of gate this loop off a bit. But now what I want to show you is a couple of little tricks here. So let's duplicate a clip down on this tambourine loop here, and we'll just call this the perk loop. I already kind of like it as it is, so we're not really doing much at the moment. But let's say that we have the top one here we're going to call original, and the second one here we're going to make a change. And what we're going to do is we're going to move the sample start point around here, and we're going to start from somewhere else in the clip, right? And what we can do is actually kind of control that inside the clip with automation. So if we go to the original, this is a nice way as well to make variations of your clips going down for sections in the track where changes happen. So what we can do is go into the envelopes, and because I've already been playing around with it, here's the sample start point in the automation line here, right? So if we're moving this up and down, we're changing where the sample is playing back from. So if I click original, it's at 0 and it's starting from the very beginning. So if I go to the next one and I grab that automation and I say, let's try 34, but I'm going to probably move that. Let's drag it around a bit. And if you want to sort of do it, you could do it the way I'm doing it, or you could also do it here first, where you play around a bit with this before you automate it. So if I kind of turn this off, right, and we go back here, we can play around with this till we get a nice timing change and then put that number into the automation. That's quite techno because it's kind of like a bit of a polymeter, so it's not coming back around the same timing every time, just kind of making it interesting. So I turned on loop so that it would keep looping around, but it's kind of an interesting, let's turn off some other stuff. So it's quite different. If you start it from the bar like this, it's going to stay in time. Where I had it before in between, I'm getting like a little polyrhythm, which could be nice to play around with. But what I'm doing is I'm just simply kind of re-triggering this clip from another point in the clip, which is kind of interesting depending on how the percussion sounds as it goes through the loop. And in this case, it is quite different. I can kind of see that with my eyes. So maybe we start from bar 4. And then if we jump back to the original, the idea would be trying to make a bit of a change between the two. So maybe I will go between the lines. Right, a bit more interesting. Now if I jump back, what you could do is set these up into like a follow actions, but it's just a simple thing, and depending on what the sample is, it's going to be really, really quite different what happens with the results. So if this was a music loop, I think I have an example over here, so you can kind of check this out in a different way, as this one might make a bit more sense than the percussion, as it's very subtle what's happening between this clip and this clip, but the concept's the same, moving the start point. And then what I didn't do was mark this one just so the automation is there. So when I trigger that clip, the sample start point is different to the sample start point in this clip. Over here, I've got something with, again, C3 note, but I've got a chord loop inside. And if you look at clip 1, the chord loop sample start is here, 43. And then, have we got the same? That's interesting. I would have thought not, but maybe we do. So we can change that actually. Or we can grab ourselves that again. Let's try that from where I have it. Okay, so let's get rid of that example. Let's look at this one. Hopefully that has a difference. Let's try it. Let's see what happens when we push play here, and then we'll dig into what's going on. Yeah. So if I hit stop now, you can see that clip 2, same concept for the MIDI note, all of that, same chord in the simpler, sorry. But different automation for the start point. So we jumped from it playing back in one clip here later in the sampler to a different point. So let's just watch down here what happens when I let that run. So one is triggering from here with the automation in the clip. And one is triggering from here. And with the follow actions, they jump around. So another kind of quite cool little way to use a simpler. You don't have to turn it into follow actions, but you could also record that, and that could be a new clip. But you can also just have it like me, that it plays one timing during one part of the track, and then when we jump to the other clip, then we're going to have a different automation of the start time. So experiment around with that. It's a great way to get a little bit of variation in there that isn't necessarily there from the start, right? And it's quite simple. You're just changing the timing in the clip of where the clip launches. And earlier on, it was sounding a bit not great to start with, but as I said, there is the possibility of creating polymeters in here by changing that it triggers from within the clip and it's shorter than a bar. And then we're starting to get very different timing in the second clip compared to the first, which is just playing all the way through. So let's put it back in with everything else. Right. So let's try something else with the same percussion loop maybe. Let's duplicate the track over, and let's, in this case, we can keep one clip. It's just the C3 legato note. We know it's playing the right number of bars for the play all the way through the sample. Let's reset the sample start to here. We could also, by the way, this sample start's a lot of fun because we could modulate that, so that could be jumping around, which is another whole technique that we can use as well. And we don't need leaping on if we're going to play all the way through. And what we're going to do now is we're going to put this into a rack like so. So let's group it. Command G to do that. I'm going to open up the chains and let's just set the transient preserve back, all of that. Let's duplicate our chain. So we've got 2 of these. And in one of these, we're going to reverse the sample. So let's pop in here and reverse it. So one tambourine loop's going in the forward direction and one is going in the reverse direction. Let's have a listen to that. And again, the possibilities with this are endless. So we've got a reverse layer. Let's name it here. These are just some sort of things to try out right and experiment with. Great for house and techno, great for using a sample or a loop and turning it into something else. This one's going to be the original. Because as soon as I start doing this, the basic concept is simple. But then I start thinking, okay, well, we could pitch it up or down, we could add effects after it. There's really an awful lot we could do here to make these layers interesting and different. So with the reverse layer, let's bring the transient envelope down a bit. And let's try repitching it. Now I'm guessing we can't do that because warping's on, but we can turn that off if we want, and instead of using the transient. Yeah, so not that much variation on repitching of it. So I'm going to go back to what I had. I think I did up on the wrong sample, which was why. Let's just make sure. We'll check that in a moment. So let's try that again. We're in the reversed one down here. Yeah, my bad. So now it's an octave pitched up and it's reversed. Let's give it a bit of panning. We can't, yeah, now we can. Let's put the original back in. Nice. So we're layering the two. The pitch up and the reverse kind of adds a nice character. So again, we could print that, or we could leave it like it is, or we could turn that into a new audio clip. All sorts of pretty wild possibilities. Let's try that at 100 and the other one more gated. Or less gated even. Hopefully this is giving you just some ideas and some inspiration to try out with the simpler. Very simple kind of concept, but layering the percussion, a reverse layer with a straight direction layer. And as I said, we can kind of play them independent of each other together, and it kind of creates a nice, interesting percussion layer for what we have. We could also process these a little bit as well. So I'm adding a phaser to the reverse layer, turning up the feedback, kind of getting all this kind of quirkiness to it. So that's a really nice, cool sounding layer in my opinion on its own now. So on that note, folks, I think I'm going to wrap it up for today's stream as we're reaching the sort of 2 hour mark. As always, there's lots and lots more to unpack. It's a case of getting the progress done to this point in that amount of time, but there are more things to sort of explore with the simpler. But I think even just things like we're looking at here with that percussion loop now and sort of giving it a new lease of life and playing around with the reverse layer and the original, adding a bit of effects, flipping the sample, changing the preserved transients, adding this phaser. We're getting a really nice, interesting kind of loop out of that has all sorts of possibilities. As I said, we could record that out to audio, and that would be a brand new audio loop that we could use in this track, in other tracks. You know, so many possibilities as always. So the idea today a little bit was to look at samples, to look at why I think it's a great part of music making to include samples. But in this case, as I said, we weren't looking today at just using samples on audio tracks and just dragging and dropping them on there and hitting play. We were putting them all into simplers and sort of looking at what the simplers can do in some cases, how we can get a bit more movement into the sample by using things like obviously the LFOs built into the simpler, also the envelope of the filter and the filter itself. All of those things can get a lot more vibe out of a sample being inside a simpler, as opposed, again, just to dropping that on an audio track. We've also been playing them as an instrument here or there, particularly with the bass. We've also paid attention to how to get a sample into a sampler and make sure that if we want to play it as an instrument, that we're getting when we play a C, we get a C back. So I hope you've found that beneficial and interesting, and you've learned something as we've gone along. Again, you know, I tried to give an example where I'm sitting in a space where I don't have a 909, I don't have a Juno, and I don't have a monopoly. I didn't end up using anything from that, but I've built a little pack today, which were samples that I've collected over the years that gave me beautifully recorded 909 samples, Juno 106 samples recorded from the synth. And I did have, as I said, monopoly ones as well. And that's a great way to maybe bring a whole new texture and atmosphere and style to your tracks. And maybe you want to make a nod to the past, that's why you're doing it. Or maybe you want to have less digital sound in your modern sound. Or like I said, you're paying homage to the past. But I think, yeah, as I said, I certainly wouldn't be somebody who would say, no, I'm not using samples. I think just always the key is to explore and turn them into your own unique sounds, rather than just sort of using them, as I said, as they are straight out of the box. So everything that's here today is here today in this computer, using those sounds. It's not something that you're going to find elsewhere. So I think it's worth putting that effort in. And as I said, we still didn't get all the possibilities out that we can do with simplest. So stay tuned. There's lots more to go on this channel in terms of trying to help you guys and girls with your music production. So on that note, let's just do a very quick recap of what we've got. I'm not completely sold on my pad drone sound, but that's something that happens as you work on music for a bit. It's mainly meant to be an atmosphere in the back. But yeah, everything else comes together, and we've got sort of some kind of probably like old school, most tech house. It's a little bit between the two genres there, of house and techno. It's got a bit of sort of housey vibe, and it's got sort of a few kind of techno elements to it. So I've straddled both. Cheat codes for house and techno. I guess that's the idea there. So Stuart Denihilation, DC Decarmitch 00. Thanks for dropping some questions and being in the chat with me today. Appreciated you being there. Good questions from Stuart Ross there. And hopefully I answered those of you who dropped a question there and wanted an answer about that. Take care. I'll pop a video here at the end cards of a video, if you enjoyed this one, to watch next. And come join me for next Sunday's live stream, where we dive in again to all things electronic music, Ableton Live, and I try to, as I said, help you guys and girls become better music producers, level up your skills, etc., etc. Have an amazing rest of your Sunday and weekend. Take care of yourselves. Keep on creating, and catch you in the next live stream. Heath Home over and out. Ciao for now. Bye-bye. Ciao.